In Las Vegas, inside the roaring MGM Grand Arena, a calm legend sat unnoticed while a flamboyant challenger was about to ignite a confrontation. What began as a martial arts exhibition turned deadly serious when Steven Seagal seized the microphone and called out Chuck Norris before thousands of stunned fans. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical guest spectator. For decades, he had been a world karate champion, a disciplined martial artist whose quiet composure had shaped both Hollywood and real-world combat. Known for ending fights before they truly began, his reputation carried the weight of inevitability. When Steven Seagal challenged him openly on the exhibition floor, the Aikido master had no idea he was facing a man whose stillness was more dangerous than any theatrical display. Norris responded with a single, perfectly timed strike that would silence an arena and ignite a myth destined to echo for generations. What began as a planned demonstration became a raw collision of ego and mastery. Las Vegas would never be the same after one strike revealed the truth. True power needs no announcement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The arena pulsed with raw energy. Every seat filled. Every voice melding into a deafening roar that echoed off the walls like thunder trapped in a canyon. Floodlights beamed down onto the polished mat at center stage, surrounded by velvet ropes instead of cage wire. This was Las Vegas in the late 90s, where martial arts exhibitions were still half sport, half theater. Cameras flashed like lightning as fans shouted from every corner. Some waved banners. Others leaned forward on the edge of their seats, eyes locked on the platform where legends would soon collide. The night's energy felt alive, almost electric, charged with the promise of something extraordinary. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed through speakers, reverberating against concrete walls. Welcome to the ultimate martial arts exhibition. The crowd's roar doubled, drowning his next words until he raised his hand, commanding silence with practiced authority. Tonight, we witness the greatest fighters of our generation. In the midst of this chaos sat Chuck Norris, calm and composed, ringside in the VIP section. Dressed in a simple dark jacket and jeans, he did not move. No entourage. No attention-seeking. Yet eyes naturally shifted toward him, this quiet warrior, whose reputation spoke volumes without a single word from the man himself. He sat effortlessly still, one hand resting loosely on his knee, the other by his side. No grin, no cheers, just focus. His eyes never left the exhibition floor. 20 feet away, surrounded by a swarm of handlers, cameras, and fawning fans, Steven Seagal made his entrance. The contrast could not have been starker. Where Norris blended into his seat, Seagal commanded the room. Clad in an ornate silk jacket with elaborate embroidery, hair slicked back into his signature ponytail, he moved with deliberate, theatrical slowness, pausing to bow at the crowd, to shake extended hands, to nod sagely at comments thrown his way. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the master of Aikido, the man who brings Eastern discipline to Western screens, Steven Seagal! The crowd erupted. Seagal raised both hands, palms pressed together in a prayer position, and bowed deeply, holding the pose longer than necessary, letting the cameras capture his profile against the backdrop of adoring fans. He proceeded to his seat with measured steps, occasionally pausing to acknowledge another cheer, another outstretched hand. The announcer continued introducing other fighters, but the energy had already split between the room's two gravitational forces: Seagal's flamboyant presence and Norris's quiet dignity. Despite being separated by rows of seats, an invisible current seemed to connect them, oil and water, sharing the same container but fundamentally opposed. From his seat, Seagal caught sight of Norris. Their eyes met for half a second before Norris looked away, his expression unchanging. but Seagal's mouth twitched into the ghost of a smirk. He leaned toward one of his entourage, whispered something that made the man glance nervously toward Norris, then laugh uncomfortably. The first exhibition match began a showcase between two young martial artists demonstrating traditional forms. Their movements were precise, disciplined, graceful. The crowd appreciated it politely, but this was merely the appetizer. Throughout the demonstration, Seagal shifted in his seat, occasionally whispering comments that made those around him snicker. Norris remained motionless, watching each movement with the practiced eye of someone who had dedicated his life to mastering every nuance of combat. As the demonstration concluded, the crowd's applause felt perfunctory, restrained energy waiting for release. The announcer returned to center stage, microphone in hand. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a special demonstration from one of our honored guests. Mr. Steven Seagal has graciously agreed to show us the power of Aikido. The crowd erupted as Seagal stood, removing his elaborate jacket to reveal a traditional gi underneath. He handed the jacket to an assistant with practiced casualness, then walked toward the platform with slow, deliberate steps, a man entirely aware of every eye upon him. The exhibition mat cleared as Seagal took center stage. 3 assistants joined him, taking positions around him. What followed was a choreographed demonstration of Aikido techniques. Wrist locks, throws, joint manipulations, each executed with theatrical precision. Seagal moved with surprising fluidity for his size, his face a mask of concentration as he sent his assistants flying across the mat with seemingly minimal effort. The crowd reacted with appropriate awe, gasping at particularly impressive throws. Throughout his demonstration, Seagal's eyes occasionally flicked toward Norris, checking, almost unconsciously, for reaction. But Norris's expression remained unchanged, neither impressed nor dismissive, simply observing. As the demonstration reached its climax, Seagal executed a complex throw that sent his final assistant tumbling across the mat. The crowd cheered wildly. Seagal stood center stage, breathing controlled, and bowed deeply. When he straightened, his eyes locked directly on Norris, a challenge in his gaze that everyone in the vicinity could feel. The announcer returned, clapping enthusiastically. Incredible demonstration of power and control. Ladies and gentlemen, Steven Seagal. More applause thundered through the arena. Seagal nodded, accepting the adulation as his due. But instead of returning to his seat, he turned to the announcer and gestured for the microphone. The announcer hesitated for just a fraction of a second. This wasn't in the program, before handing it over with a nervous smile. Seagal took the microphone, pacing the mat with casual confidence. The crowd quieted, anticipation building. "You know," Seagal began, his voice low and measured, "what I just showed you isn't acting. It isn't choreography." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "In Hollywood, there are those who pretend, and those who know." Another pause. His eyes found Norris again. "Tonight, we have legends among us. Men whose reputations have grown beyond themselves." The crowd murmured, sensing something unplanned unfolding before them. Cameras swiveled, catching the tension building between the two men. "But reputations," Seagal continued, "should be tested, proven." His voice carried through the silent arena. "Isn't that right, Chuck?" A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned to Chuck Norris, who hadn't moved an inch, his expression unreadable beneath his beard. For a long moment, he said nothing, simply meeting Seagal's gaze across the distance. The silence stretched, electric with tension. In that moment, everyone understood something unscripted was about to change the course of the evening, and not a soul in the arena could look away. The silence hung suspended, a held breath moments before the plunge. Seagal stood center mat, microphone in hand. His challenge to Norris, still echoing through the arena. The crowd's energy shifted from entertainment to something roar collective witnesses to a line being crossed. "What do you say, Chuck?" Seagal's voice cut through the tension, amplified for everyone to hear. "They say you're the best." He gestured broadly to the crowd. "They've made you into some kind of myth." A smirk played at the corner of his mouth. "But myths need testing, don't they?" Cameras swung between the two men, catching Seagal's confident stance and Norris's still form. The contrast was striking: motion versus stillness, theatrics versus quiet. Norris remained seated, his expression unchanged. Not angry, not embarrassed. Simply observing, as if watching a natural phenomenon unfold before him. This lack of visible reaction seemed to fuel Seagal further. "I respect your films, Chuck. Great entertainment." Seagal paced the mat, addressing the crowd now as much as Norris. "But we're not on a movie set tonight. This is real." He gestured to the mat beneath his feet. "In this space, we separate fact from fiction." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed discomfort at the public challenging of a legend. Others leaned forward, eager for drama. The event organizers exchanged nervous glances off stage. This spontaneous confrontation wasn't part of the carefully planned exhibition. The announcer approached Seagal cautiously, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. But Seagal waved him off with casual authority. The announcer retreated, looking helplessly toward Norris. "The thing about legends," Seagal continued, "is eventually they start believing their own press." He locked eyes with Norris again. "I'm offering you a chance, Chuck, right here, to show these people what's real." Somewhere in the crowd, a voice shouted, "Let's see it, Chuck." Another joined, "Show him, Norris." The individual calls coalesced into a chant, "Norris, Norris, Norris." Through it all, Chuck Norris remained unmoved. His stillness became its own force in the room, a counterweight to Seagal's movement, to the crowd's building frenzy. His eyes never left Seagal, but he made no move to stand, to respond, to engage with the public baiting. Seagal's smirk widened slightly. "See, folks? That's the thing about legends. When challenged in the real world," he let the implication hang. Near the front row, a martial arts journalist leaned toward his colleague. "This is insane," he whispered. "Norris doesn't do this kind of thing. Never has." His colleague nodded. "Seagal's pushing boundaries even for him." Seagal sensed the crowd's divided energy and played to it masterfully. "Just one exchange, Chuck. Let's give these people what they came for, a glimpse of what happens when reputation meets reality." The veteran referee, positioned at the edge of the mat, shifted uncomfortably. He'd officiated thousands of matches, but this unplanned confrontation between two celebrities clearly fell outside protocol. His eyes darted to the event organizer, who looked equally uncertain. In the front row, Chuck Norris blinked once the first movement he'd made since Seagal began speaking. Something imperceptible shifted in his posture, not tension, exactly, but a subtle change that those trained in combat might recognize as focused awareness. "What do you say, Chuck?" Seagal pressed, his voice carrying a hint of mockery now. "Or would you rather keep the legend intact? Safer that way, isn't it?" The chanting grew louder. "Nor. Riz. Nor. Riz." It thundered from all corners of the arena, becoming impossible to ignore. Camera flashes intensified, capturing every moment of the unprecedented confrontation. Seagal raised his arms, playing to the crowd's energy. "I think they want to see something real, Chuck. One exchange between legends. What do you say?" And then, with deliberate slowness, Chuck Norris moved. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't leap to his feet or point back at Seagal. He simply uncrossed his legs and stood. The motion was fluid, controlled, a man rising not out of anger or pride, but simply because he had decided to stand. The crowd's reaction was immediate and explosive. Cheers erupted from every section of the arena. People jumped to their feet, phones and cameras raised high to capture the moment. The chanting doubled in volume. Norris! 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 Seagal's expression flickered for just an instant's surprise. Perhaps that his challenge had been accepted before settling back into confident showmanship. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "it looks like Chuck Norris has accepted my invitation." The referee stepped forward hesitantly, looking between the two men. This wasn't a sanctioned match. There were no rules established, no agreements signed, but the momentum had already built beyond anyone's control. Chuck Norris removed his jacket with unhurried movements, handing it to a wide-eyed attendant who had rushed to his side. Underneath, he wore a simple black t-shirt, no gi, no theatrical costume. He began walking toward the mat, each step measured and deliberate. As he approached, the crowd's noise transformed, the chanting dissolved into a hushed, expectant silence. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something extraordinary, something unplanned and raw that transcended entertainment. The event organizer hurried to the announcer, whispering urgently. The announcer nodded and stepped forward with his own microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice slightly strained, "we are experiencing an unscheduled demonstration between Steven Seagal and Chuck Norris. Please remain in your seats," and he trailed off, clearly at a loss for how to frame what was happening. As Norris reached the edge of the mat, he paused. For the first time that evening, he spoke, his voice quiet enough that only those nearest could hear him. "No microphone," he said simply. The attendant who had taken his jacket rushed to relay this to the announcer, who nodded quickly. "Mr. Norris has requested that Mr. Seagal relinquish the microphone for this exchange," the announcer stated. Something tightened in Seagal's jaw, but his smile remained fixed. With theatrical grace, he handed the microphone back to the announcer, then turned to face Norris fully. "I'm glad you decided to join me, Chuck," he said, voice projecting without the microphone. "Let's show them what's real." Norris stepped onto the mat. No dramatic entrance, no playing to the crowd. He simply took his position opposite Seagal, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose at his sides. His face remained calm, neither angry nor anxious. A man who had faced combat too many times to be rattled by spectacle. The referee approached cautiously, looking between the two men. "Gentlemen," he began, "I need to establish some parameters for this demonstration." Seagal waved dismissively. "One exchange. Clean. That's all we need." Norris said nothing, his silence implying consent. The referee nodded, still clearly uncomfortable. "One exchange," he confirmed. "At my signal, you will engage. At my signal, you will disengage. Is that understood?" Seagal nodded, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet, warming up, playing to the crowd with his preparation. "Perfectly clear," he replied. Norris simply nodded once. The referee backed away, giving the two men space. The arena fell so silent that the sound of the air conditioning could be heard cycling through the vents overhead. In that moment of crystallized tension, two philosophies stood opposed, not just two men, but two approaches to the martial way. Seagal, theatrical and dominant. A man who had built a career on visible displays of power. Norris, contained and precise. whose reputation rested on consistent discipline rather than spectacle. The referee raised his hand, prepared to begin the exchange that thousands would later claim to have witnessed, that would be debated in martial arts circles for decades to come. The moment stretched, suspended in time, as the crowd collectively held its breath. And then, the referee's hand fell. The referee's hand sliced downward. The universal signal to begin. But neither man moved immediately. They stood 3 yards apart on the exhibition mat, eyes locked. Bodies still a tableau of potential energy not yet released. Seagal shifted his weight forward slightly, rolling his shoulders movements designed to be seen, to command attention. His stance widened, hands raising into a traditional Aikido position. His face wore the focused expression familiar from his films, eyes narrowed beneath heavy brows. Norris remained motionless, hands still at his sides, watching, just watching. The crowd's silence deepened. Those who had expected an immediate clash felt the tension building instead, understanding slowly that what they were witnessing was already part of the confrontation. A battle of presence before any physical exchange. "Whenever you're ready, Chuck," Seagal said, voice carrying across the mat. The words were polite, but the tone held an edge of mockery. Norris didn't respond, didn't shift stance, didn't raise his hands. He simply stood, seemingly at ease, as if waiting for something only he could perceive. This lack of response visibly unsettled Seagal. The smile remained fixed, but something flickered in his eyes, a momentary uncertainty. He was a man accustomed to controlling encounters, to dictating their rhythm and flow. Norris's stillness disrupted that control. The seconds stretched. 10, 15, 20. Murmurs began rippling through the crowd. Was this some kind of psychological game? Was Norris refusing the challenge after all? Cameras continued flashing, capturing the strange standoff. Seagal, perhaps sensing the crowd's confusion, decided to take control of the narrative. He began circling slowly to his right, hands still raised in fighting position, movements exaggerated enough to be theatrical. "Traditional approach, Chuck?" he called. "Or something more dynamic?" Still, Norris didn't move, didn't circle in response, simply pivoted slightly to keep Seagal in his field of vision, hands remaining relaxed at his sides. The referee glanced between them, clearly uncertain whether he should intervene. This wasn't combat yet, but it wasn't exactly the exchange that had been agreed upon either. Seagal completed his circle, ending where he'd begun. The smile had tightened, no longer reaching his eyes. "I understood this was an exchange," he said, voice harder now. "Are you going to participate, Chuck?" For the first time since stepping onto the mat, Norris spoke. His voice was quiet but carried clearly in the silent arena. "I'm here." Those two simple words, neither aggressive nor defensive, just factual, sent a ripple through the crowd. Some laughed nervously. Others exchanged glances of confusion or anticipation. Seagal's face darkened slightly. "Being present isn't the same as engaging," he countered. "Perhaps reputation has made you cautious. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Without warning, Seagal stepped forward, executing a quick, sharp series of hand movements. Not strikes, but the opening motions of Aikido, designed to control space and distance. His hands cut through the air with practiced precision, stopping just short of contact with Norris's personal space. It was a demonstration, not an attack, a statement of skill and control. The crowd responded with scattered applause, recognition of the technical expertise displayed. Throughout the display, Norris remained still, not flinching, not backing away, not raising his hands defensively. His eyes tracked Seagal's movements with calm assessment, but his body maintained its relaxed posture. When Seagal finished the sequence, stepping back into his starting position, something had changed in the energy between them. The theatrical display had neither intimidated nor impressed Norris, and somehow, in that non-reaction, power had shifted. "Your turn," Seagal said, gesturing expansively, inviting Norris to demonstrate his own skills. Norris simply shook his head once. "Not a performance," he said quietly. The words hung in the air. Not a performance. 4 syllables that cut to the heart of the distinction between them, between spectacle and substance, between showing and doing. Seagal's jaw tightened visibly. For the first time, his composure showed cracks not from fear, but from frustration. He was a man who understood and controlled dramatic narratives, who knew how to build toward a climax that showcased his abilities. Norris's refusal to participate in that structure left him without his usual tools. "Then what are we doing here, Chuck?" he asked, voice hardening further. Norris's reply was simple. "Your invitation. Your move." The crowd's energy shifted again, some laughing, some applauding the succinct response. Even the referee allowed himself a small smile before quickly neutralizing his expression. Something dangerous flashed in Seagal's eyes. The theatrical element was falling away, revealing something raw underneath pride, challenged, perhaps, or the realization that this encounter wasn't following his intended script. He rolled his neck, a gesture familiar from his films, then settled deeper into his stance. "All right, Chuck," he said, voice lower now. "Since you insist." The change was immediate. Seagal's movements lost their performative quality, becoming sharper, more focused. He stepped forward with deliberate intent, hands positioning for a genuine entry rather than a demonstration. This was no longer exhibition. This was engagement. As Seagal closed distance, Norris finally moved. Not dramatically, not with any wasted motion, his hands simply raised into position, feet shifting slightly to establish proper foundation. The movement was so efficient, so minimal, that it almost didn't register visually. But martial artists in the audience recognized it immediately. A master, establishing structure without telegraph. Seagal initiated contact with a classic Aikido entry. Hands moving to secure Norris's wrist, a setup for a standard throw or control technique. His execution was textbook, movements fluid and powerful, exactly as he'd performed countless times before. What happened next occurred so quickly that many in the audience missed it. There was contact, a slight shift in balance, a minute adjustment of position, and suddenly Seagal was off-center, his own momentum carrying him forward as Norris simply wasn't where he was supposed to be. Seagal recovered quickly, professional enough to adjust to the failed technique. He reset, circling again, expression now fully serious. The performance had vanished entirely, replaced by genuine focus. The crowd leaned forward collectively, sensing the shift. This wasn't choreographed entertainment anymore. This was something authentic unfolding before them, a true test between different approaches to martial arts. Seagal engaged again, more directly this time, a combination entry aimed at controlling Norris's center. His movements were crisp, powerful, technically sound. Against most opponents, it would have succeeded. But Norris moved with such economy, such precision, that Seagal's techniques found no purchase, not through dramatic evasion or countering, but through subtle weight shifts and positional adjustments that rendered the attacks ineffective before they fully developed. After the third such exchange, something changed in Seagal's demeanor. The confident smile had disappeared completely, replaced by intense concentration. Beads of sweat had formed on his brow not from physical exertion, but from the mental strain of encountering something outside his expected experience. He stepped back, reassessing. For a moment, genuine respect flickered across his features as he regarded Norris with new eyes. But pride quickly reasserted itself. "Impressive evasion, Chuck," he said, voice controlled but tight. "But defense alone isn't combat." Norris nodded once, acknowledging the point without argument. Then, for the first time since the exchange began, he shifted his weight forward slightly. A subtle change in posture that any trained fighter would recognize as intent. The crowd sensed it too. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Phones raised higher, cameras focused sharper. No one wanted to miss what might happen next. Seagal recognized the shift and responded, settling deeper into his stance, hands positioning for both offense and defense. For a brief moment, mutual respect passed between the two men practitioners, acknowledging each other beyond the theatrics and reputation. Then Norris stepped forward. The movement was so simple, so direct, that it appeared almost casual to untrained observers. No dramatic chambering, no telegraphed preparation. Just a single, economic step that closed distance with perfect timing. What followed was not a flurry of strikes or a complex technique. It was singular and precise. One perfectly placed strike, delivered with such clean mechanics that it seemed almost understated. Almost. The impact, however, was anything but understated. Seagal's head snapped back, his body following the force of the blow. He staggered, legs buckling momentarily before years of training allowed him to regain balance. His hand went to his jaw, eyes wide with shock, not just from the physical impact, but from the jarring collision between expectation and reality. The crowd exploded. Cheers, gasps, and shouts filled the arena. People leaped to their feet, some simply staring in disbelief, others already turning to their neighbors to confirm what they'd just witnessed. The referee stepped forward quickly, hands raised to prevent further engagement. But there was no need. Norris had already stepped back, returning to his neutral position, hands lowering to his sides. His expression remained unchanged, no triumph, no aggression, no playing to the crowd. Simply a man who had completed the task before him with maximum efficiency. Seagal straightened slowly, hand still at his jaw. For a moment, naked emotion crossed his face. Shock, disbelief, perhaps even humiliation. Then, with visible effort, he composed himself, nodding slowly. "Clean hit," he acknowledged, voice slightly rough. The referee looked between them, then raised his hand. "Exchange complete," he announced, clearly relieved that the unplanned confrontation had reached a conclusion without escalation. The arena remained in uproar. The crowd on its feet, the moment already crystallizing into the kind of story that would be told and retold, embellished with each iteration. Cameras continued flashing, capturing the aftermath, Seagal standing slightly dazed, Norris calm and centered. Without ceremony, Norris turned and began walking from the mat, his exit as understated as his entrance had been. No victory gesture, no acknowledgement of the crowd's continued chanting of his name. Simply a man who had finished what was required of him and now moved on to what came next. As he reached the edge of the mat, he paused and turned back. Seagal still stood center stage, watching him go. Their eyes met one final time across the distance. Norris nodded, once a gesture of respect. Warrior to warrior. Beyond the drama that had brought them to this point. Then he continued walking, disappearing into the tunnel that led backstage, leaving behind an arena full of witnesses to a moment that defied expectation, where substance had spoken louder than style, where one clean strike had said more than any elaborate demonstration could have conveyed. In his wake, a truth hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. True strength requires no announcement. It simply is. Backstage, chaos erupted. Event organizers huddled in emergency conference while security personnel maintained a protective cordon around the area. Journalists pushed against barriers, shouting questions, cameras flashing like strobe lights. Medical staff hovered anxiously, though neither participant had requested their services. Through this storm of activity, the older martial artist moved with the same calm deliberation that had marked his presence all evening. He navigated the crowded hallway without hurry, acknowledging staff with brief nods but offering no statements to the press clamoring for his attention. Was that planned or spontaneous? How long has this rivalry been building? Just one comment. One comment on what happened out there. He continued walking, neither accelerating to escape the questions nor slowing to engage with them. His face remained composed, not celebratory, not smug, simply present in the moment. Each step deliberate, each breath measured, as if this chaotic aftermath were just another form of practice, another opportunity to maintain center amidst turbulence. An event coordinator intercepted him. Clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. Her name badge identified her as Teresa Huang, production manager. Sweat beaded along her hairline, and her eyes darted nervously between the martial artist and the commotion behind them. "Sir, we need to discuss what just happened," she said, voice strained with professional composure, threatening to crack. "The program has been completely disrupted and—" "I apologize for the disruption," he said quietly, his voice carrying no defensiveness, just simple acknowledgement. Teresa blinked, momentarily disarmed by the straightforward response. She'd clearly prepared for denial, for justification, for the kind of ego-driven explanations that typically followed unplanned incidents at high-profile events. "Well, yes. But we need to decide how to proceed." She gestured vaguely toward the arena. "Your counterpart is still out there. And the crowd is. Well, they're quite worked up." The martial artist considered this briefly, eyes focusing on some middle distance as he processed the situation's ripple effects. "I've completed my part," he said. "The rest is yours to manage." Teresa opened her mouth to respond, perhaps to press further, to insist on more concrete assistance when a commotion at the far end of the hallway drew their attention. The younger martial artist had entered backstage, surrounded by his entourage and trailed by event security, struggling to hold back the press. Unlike his opponent's quiet exit, his arrival carried all the energy of a storm front, voices raised, movements sharp, the space around him electric with tension. "Completely unacceptable. That wasn't what we agreed to." His voice rose above the general clamor, directed at no one in particular, but pitched to Carrie. A young assistant rushed alongside him, frantically dabbing at his jaw with what appeared to be a cold compress. He waved her away impatiently, his gaze sweeping the hallway until it landed on his opponent with laser focus. The entourage around him tensed, sensing confrontation. Security personnel moved closer, hands raised in preemptive peacekeeping gestures. For a moment, the backstage area fell into tense silence, everyone acutely aware of the potential for escalation. Two philosophies had already clashed on stage. Now they stood opposed in the fluorescent, lit concrete hallway, stripped of theatrical setting but no less symbolic. The younger martial artist stepped forward, breaking from his protective circle. His jaw showed a reddening mark where his opponent's strike had landed, but he carried himself with determined dignity. When he spoke, his voice had regained its measured control. "That was one exchange," he said. "Hardly definitive." The older man regarded him silently for a moment before responding. "It wasn't meant to be definitive. Then what was it meant to be? The younger man pressed. Genuine confusion, mixing with lingering frustration in his expression. A vein pulsed visibly at his temple, betraying the effort required to maintain composure. An answer to a question, came the simple reply. The cryptic response hung in the air between them. Around them, staff and security watched uneasily, while journalists scribbled frantically, capturing every word of the unexpected confrontation. Teresa stepped back slightly, sensing that something profound was unfolding, something beyond her authority or responsibility to manage. The younger martial artist's eyes narrowed slightly. The question being, whether your reputation is deserved. A hint of challenge returned to his voice, though more subdued now, tempered by experience. His opponent shook his head once. The question you asked, not with words. Understanding slowly dawned in the younger man's expression. Realization that the physical exchange had been answering something deeper than the public challenge, something communicated between practitioners beyond verbal statements. His posture shifted subtly, the defensive tension easing from his shoulders. I see, he said finally, voice quieter. The performance element had fallen away completely now, leaving just the martial artist beneath the celebrity persona. He absently touched his jaw again, tracing the point of impact. And was it a satisfactory answer? That's for you to determine, the older man replied. A long moment of silence stretched between them, not hostile, but weighted with mutual recognition. Two men who had built lives around different interpretations of the same principles, finally seeing each other clearly beyond reputation and image. Someone coughed nervously. A camera flashed, breaking the spell. Teresa cleared her throat. Gentlemen, we really need to address the situation out there. The audience is waiting, and we're already 20 minutes behind schedule. Neither man immediately acknowledged her, their focus still on each other. Something unspoken still passing between them. A mutual assessment, perhaps, or a recognition that stretched beyond the moment into shared understanding of paths diverged but parallel. Finally, the younger martial artist nodded once. Not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The audience deserves closure, he said. We should return together. The older man considered this, then nodded, in agreement. To finish properly. Teresa exhaled audibly in relief. Thank you, gentlemen. If you'll follow me, we can… A moment, the younger man interrupted. He gestured for his entourage to step back, creating a small pocket of privacy in the crowded hallway. A few looked reluctant to withdraw, particularly a heavy-set man with a perpetual scowl who seemed to function as head of security. But a sharp glance from their employer sent them retreating several paces, creating an island of relative calm amidst the backstage chaos. Once they were relatively alone, he addressed his opponent directly, voice low enough that only those closest could hear. That strike northern Chinese origin? A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps appreciation, crossed the older man's face, softening the stoic mask he had worn throughout the evening. Korean foundation, personal adaptation. The younger martial artist nodded. Professional interest, momentarily superseding all other concerns. Clean mechanics. I misread the entry angle. Intentional setup, the older man acknowledged. A ghost of a smile touched the younger man's lips. Genuine this time. Not performative. Well executed. He rubbed his jaw reflexively. Effective. For the first time that evening, the older martial artist's expression softened slightly. Not quite a smile, but an easing of the stoic mask. Thank you. In that brief exchange lay the core of what connected them beyond their differences. Respect for craft, for technique, for the art form they had both dedicated their lives to, albeit through different approaches and philosophies. The language of body mechanics, of angles and forces, of timing and positioning, transcended their surface opposition. Here, in the technical details of execution, they found common ground that their public personas rarely allowed. A photographer, sensing the moment's significance, attempted to push forward for a better shot. A security guard intercepted him with a firm hand on his shoulder. "Give them space," he muttered. The younger martial artist glanced around, becoming aware again of their surroundings, the hovering press, the anxious staff, the ticking clock of a derailed event. "We should return," he said. The older man nodded in agreement. Teresa stepped forward again, clipboard now clutched like a shield. "Gentlemen?" The audience? They turned toward her in unison, the moment of connection complete. The younger martial artist gestured toward the corridor, leading back to the arena. "After you." The older man shook his head once. "Together. Your event. Your lead." The younger man acknowledged this with a slight bow, the theatrical element returning, but tempered now with something more authentic. Side by side, they began walking toward the arena, security clearing a path before them, journalists scrambling to follow. As they walked, the contrast between them remained striking, the younger man's elaborate clothing and physical presence beside the older man's simple attire and economical movement. Yet something had aligned between them. A mutual recognition that transcended style and approach. "They'll want us to explain," the younger man said quietly as they approached the entrance to the main floor. "Some things explain themselves," the older man replied. "Perhaps. But people prefer words to silence, narrative to experience. Their preference, not ours." The younger man considered this, then smiled, faintly. "You've built a career on few words. And you, on many," the older man countered, but without judgment. "Different paths. Same destination." They paused at the threshold. The roar of the crowd audible beyond. The announcer had been attempting to regain control, to redirect attention to scheduled demonstrations, but the audience remained unsettled, energy focused on the unresolved tension between the two masters. "What happens now?" the younger martial artist asked, and for a moment, vulnerability showed through his carefully constructed persona, a genuine question from one practitioner to another, stripped of performance. "Now," the older man said simply, "we complete what began." With that, he stepped forward, the younger man matching his stride. Together they emerged onto the main floor, into the immediate explosion of camera flashes and renewed crowd noise. The announcer, spotting their approach, quickly raised his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the floor." His voice carried over the speakers, introducing them by name as they walked side by side toward the central mat. The crowd erupted as they appeared together, camera flashes intensifying. Some fans stood, cheering wildly. Others watched in silent anticipation, uncertain what this joint return signified after the unexpected confrontation. They reached center mat, turning to face the audience. The contrast between them remained striking, height and breadth next to more compact frame, flamboyance beside restraint, theatricality alongside simplicity. Yet something had shifted in how they occupied the space between them. A recognition, perhaps, of the validity in each other's approach. The announcer approached cautiously, offering the microphone to the younger martial artist. After a moment's hesitation, he accepted it, turning to address the still buzzing crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice carrying its familiar measured cadence, "what you witnessed tonight was unplanned, but not without value." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "In our world, the world of martial arts, there are many paths, many approaches. Tonight, you saw two of them meet." He glanced at the older martial artist, a moment of genuine acknowledgement passing between them. What my esteemed colleague demonstrated tonight was efficiency, economy, the essence of what we all strive for as martial artists. The admission clearly cost him something, but he delivered it with dignity. No wasted motion. No unnecessary flourish. The crowd had fallen silent, witnessing something far more powerful than the physical exchange. A master, acknowledging another master's skill. He turned to the older martial artist, offering him the microphone. The older man shook his head once, a small gesture that spoke volumes. He had no need for public declaration, no desire to amplify what had already been clearly demonstrated. Understanding this, the younger man nodded and returned to addressing the audience. We'll continue with the exhibition as planned. Thank you for your patience and for witnessing something authentic. As the two men left the mat, walking side by side back toward their respective positions, the crowd's response transformed from wild excitement to something deeper, respectful applause that acknowledged not just what they had seen, but what it represented. A rare moment of truth cutting through performance, substance transcending spectacle. In that walk, neither friends nor enemies but professionals, bound by mutual understanding, lay the resolution that no dramatic confrontation could have provided. Two philosophies had met, tested each other, and found their own balance. Later that evening, after the exhibition had concluded, after the crowds had dispersed and the cameras had turned elsewhere, the two men would meet again, not in the spotlight, but in a quiet corner of the hotel restaurant. There, over simple meals, they would talk for hours about technique, about philosophy, about the paths that had led them to this moment of intersection. They would discover commonalities beneath their differences, similar teachers in their early years, shared influences despite divergent expressions, parallel struggles with the commercialization of arts they both revered as sacred. The younger would speak more, gesturing expressively as he described his journey. The older would listen more, offering precise observations when he did speak. Yet in this natural division of roles, they found balance rather than opposition. We serve different purposes in this world. The older man would observe toward the end of the evening, your approach inspires beginners to start the journey. Mine reminds practitioners why they continue. Both necessary, the younger would acknowledge. Both valid. And in that simple exchange would lie the resolution of their confrontation, not victory or defeat, but recognition that apparent opposition often masks complementary purpose. That in the martial way, as in life itself, different paths ultimately serve the same journey. But that conversation remained in the future as they walked from the mat, side by side, despite their differences, having demonstrated to thousands what words alone could never convey, that true strength speaks through action, not proclamation. That real power requires no announcement. That in a world of increasing noise, silence sometimes carries the most profound statement of all. The exhibition continued according to schedule, but the energy in the arena had fundamentally shifted. The program demonstrations felt somehow hollow after the raw authenticity of what had transpired between the two masters. Audience members kept glancing toward them, now seated again in their respective sections, as if the real show remained the unspoken current still flowing between them. The younger martial artist had resumed his seat, surrounded once more by his entourage, but his demeanor had changed. The theatrical flourishes were muted, his attention more genuinely focused on the demonstrations unfolding before him. Occasionally, he would lean toward an associate to comment on a particular technique, but the performative quality had been stripped away, leaving something more authentic in its place. A slender woman with sharp features, his longtime manager, Diane, leaned close to his ear. "We should capitalize on this," she whispered urgently. "Arrange a formal rematch. The pay-per-view numbers would be astronomical." He didn't immediately respond, his eyes tracking the movements of the young practitioners demonstrating traditional forms on the exhibition floor. After a moment, he shook his head slightly. "No." Diane blinked, clearly taken aback. "What do you mean?" "No. This is the biggest publicity opportunity we've had in years. We could—" I said no. His voice remained quiet, but carried a finality that silenced further discussion. Diane exchanged bewildered glances with his publicist, who shrugged imperceptibly. Something had changed in their employer. A shift they couldn't quite identify, but could clearly sense. Across the arena, the older martial artist sat as he had before, calm, attentive, still, but those nearby noticed subtle differences. The rigid stillness had softened slightly. His eyes still tracked the movements on the exhibition floor with professional assessment, but there was an ease to his posture that hadn't been there before, as if something had been resolved. The veteran official who had overseen their exchange earlier sat several seats away, still processing what he had witnessed. 40 years of officiating matches, and he had never seen anything quite like it. Not the technique itself, which had been clean but not revolutionary, but the context surrounding it. The build-up, the tension, the singular moment of execution, and most of all, the aftermath of mutual recognition rather than triumph and defeat. Between demonstrations, a martial arts journalist leaned toward his colleague. "You realize what we just witnessed will be talked about for decades." His colleague nodded. "The question is whether anyone will believe the truth, or if it'll become just another martial arts legend." "What do you mean?" "One exchange. One strike. After all the build-up, all the tension, just one perfect strike. Too simple for people to accept. They'll embellish it until it becomes a 5-minute battle with flying kicks and dramatic reversals." The first journalist smiled faintly. "And yet the simplicity is what made it profound." "Exactly. That's what they won't understand. The perfection was in the economy of it." He tapped his notebook thoughtfully. "How do you capture that in words? How do you explain to readers that the absence of spectacle was precisely what made it spectacular?" "Maybe you don't," his colleague suggested. "Maybe you just describe exactly what happened and trust that those who understand will understand, and the rest will write their own version anyway. They always do." In the third row, a film director known for action blockbusters leaned forward, elbows on knees, brow furrowed in concentration. Beside him, his producer tapped rapidly on a smartphone. "Are you getting this?" the director asked. "We need to completely rethink the final confrontation sequence. Everything we've shot is wrong." "Wrong how?" The producer looked up, puzzled. "Too much." The director gestured vaguely toward the exhibition floor. "Too many moves, too dramatic. What we just saw, that's truth. One perfect moment that resolves everything. No dialogue needed." The producer sighed. "The studio's not going to approve a climax that lasts 2 seconds, Richard. Then they don't understand what they're selling." The director's eyes remained fixed on the older martial artist, studying his composed stillness. "Look at him. Really look. That's power. Not flying spin kicks or 20-punch combinations. Just certainty. Absolute certainty of movement." As the scheduled exhibition neared its final segment, the announcer returned to center stage. His voice carried a new note of respect, as if he too had been changed by witnessing the earlier exchange. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special closing demonstration tonight. Originally, this was planned as a group showcase of multiple styles. However," he paused, glancing toward the event coordinator offstage, who nodded encouragement. "However, in light of tonight's unexpected developments, we've made an adjustment." A murmur rippled through the crowd, anticipation mixed with curiosity. To close our event this evening, we invite our two distinguished masters to return to the floor, not for confrontation, but for demonstration. Each will present the core principles of their respective styles, followed by a joint discussion of martial philosophy. The crowd erupted in applause, excited but more restrained than before, the tone shifting from spectacle, seeking to genuine appreciation. All eyes turned toward the two men. The younger martial artist stood first, smoothing his elaborate jacket with practiced grace. There was a moment's hesitation, perhaps weighing whether this return served his interests before he nodded his acceptance of the invitation. His entourage rose with him, but he gestured for them to remain seated. "This is professional," he said quietly. "Not promotional." Across the arena, the older master also rose. The movement was characteristically fluid, no wasted energy, no unnecessary preparation. He walked toward the exhibition floor with the same measured pace that marked everything he did, not hurried, not reluctant, simply proceeding at exactly the rate the task required. They approached the exhibition floor from opposite sides, the crowd parting before them with a new reverence that hadn't been present earlier in the evening. No longer merely celebrities or entertainment figures. They had become embodiments of their craft, elevated by the authentic exchange witnessed earlier. They met at center mat, where the announcer stood with visible relief at their acceptance. He offered them both microphones, but again, the older master declined with a small shake of his head. The younger martial artist accepted his and waited as the announcer retreated, leaving them alone in the spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "martial arts is not about competition between styles, but understanding between practitioners." His voice had shed its usual theatrical cadence, speaking now with straightforward sincerity. "With my colleagues' permission, I'll demonstrate the fundamental principles of my approach, not as performance, but as education." He glanced at the older martial artist, who nodded once in acknowledgement. What followed was unlike any demonstration the younger master had given before. Gone were the elaborate techniques and theatrical flourishes that had built his reputation. Instead, he broke down core mechanics with methodical precision: the center line theory, the redirection of force, the philosophy of harmony underlying the physical movements. His explanation was technical but accessible, focusing on principles rather than spectacle. "In my system," he explained, "we seek to unify with the attacker's energy, not oppose it directly. We blend, redirect, and resolve without unnecessary force." He demonstrated with small, precise movements, showing how slight adjustments could affect balance and control. The goal is not to destroy, but to neutralize conflict through harmony of movement. Throughout this explanation, the older martial artist watched with genuine attention, not evaluating or judging, but absorbing with the same focused presence he brought to everything. Occasionally he would nod slightly at a particular point, a gesture of recognition so subtle that only those watching closely would notice. The crowd remained unusually silent, sensing they were witnessing something rare, not just technical instruction, but a master stripping away the layers of showmanship to reveal the essence beneath. Camera flashes had diminished, as if even photographers recognized that this moment deserved attention rather than documentation. When he finished his explanation, the younger martial artist turned to his counterpart with genuine respect. "My colleague practices a different approach, rooted in different traditions. I would value hearing his perspective." For a moment, the older master remained still, seemingly reluctant to step into the spotlight. Then, with a slight nod, he stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly across the hushed arena. "Efficiency," he said simply. "No wasted motion, no unnecessary force." He demonstrated his stance balanced, grounded, ready for movement in any direction. Position before action, decision before movement. His explanation was characteristically sparse, but each word carried weight. Unlike the younger master's more elaborate breakdown, he focused on fundamental principles with almost mathematical precision: the geometry of combat, the physics of impact, the economy of action. A strike should be definitive, he explained, demonstrating the mechanics of the same technique he had used earlier. Not to harm, but to conclude. One motion, properly executed, is sufficient. As he demonstrated, a ripple of recognition passed through the audience. This was exactly what they had witnessed, not just the physical technique, but the philosophy behind it. The single strike hadn't been about dominance or humiliation. It had been about resolution with maximum efficiency. The contrast in their approaches could not have been more evident. Yet, the underlying respect between them had transformed what might have been opposition into complementary perspective. Two paths to the same destination, different in approach, but united in purpose. When both had finished their explanations, the younger martial artist addressed the audience once more. Earlier tonight, you witnessed what happens when these philosophies meet. Not a contest of superiority, but a dialogue of action. He turned to the older master. Would you agree? The older man considered the question before responding. Every exchange teaches, he said finally. If we're willing to learn. The younger martial artist nodded, genuine appreciation in his expression. The lesson I take from tonight is that effectiveness transcends style. Principles matter more than techniques. And humility enables growth, the older master added quietly. The crowd sat in respectful silence, witnessing something far more valuable than the spectacle they had anticipated: two masters finding common ground beyond ego, beyond performance, in the shared pursuit of mastery. The younger martial artist extended his hand. Without hesitation, the older master accepted it, a gesture that acknowledged mutual respect beyond the differences in their approaches. Their hands clasped firmly, a physical manifestation of the bridge that had formed between their divergent paths. As their hands met, something extraordinary happened in the arena. The crowd rose in unison, applause building from appreciative to thunderous. Not the frenzied excitement of spectacle, but the deeper recognition of something authentic unfolding before them, a moment of genuine connection between two paths that had seemed opposed but revealed themselves as parallel journeys toward the same truth. The applause continued, washing over the exhibition floor in waves. Some audience members, particularly older practitioners, visible by their calloused hands and watchful eyes, had tears streaming unashamedly down their faces. They understood, perhaps better than most, the rarity of what they were witnessing. Ego surrendered to truth, form yielding to essence, the martial way transcending its physical expression to reveal the underlying philosophy that gave it meaning. The announcer returned, visibly moved by what had transpired. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've witnessed something extraordinary tonight. Something beyond exhibition, beyond demonstration. We've seen the heart of martial arts. Respect, growth, and the never-ending pursuit of mastery. As the two masters left the floor together, something had shifted not just between them, but in the atmosphere of the entire arena. The crowd's energy had transformed from hungry anticipation to thoughtful appreciation. As if everyone present understood, they had witnessed something rare and valuable, a moment where substance had transcended spectacle, where one perfect strike had spoken volumes, and where two different paths had revealed their common destination. The younger martial artist paused at the edge of the exhibition floor, turning to his counterpart. There will be pressure, he said quietly, for us to commercialize this, to create a narrative, a rivalry, a rematch. The older master nodded once. There always is. What will you say when they ask? Nothing. The older man replied simply, some moments should remain as they are. Untouched. Complete. Understanding passed between them. Recognition that what had transpired held value precisely because it hadn't been planned, packaged, or produced. Its power lay in its authenticity, in the truth that had emerged organically from their encounter. They won't understand that, the younger martial artist said, a hint of resignation in his voice. Some will. And the rest? The older master's expression softened slightly. The rest will learn in their own time. Or not. Either way, the truth remains. With that simple exchange, they parted not as adversaries, not even as friends, but as practitioners who had briefly walked the same path, each illuminating the other's journey before continuing their separate ways. In the stands, a young practitioner, perhaps 16, with the gangly build of someone still growing into his strength, turned to his instructor. Confusion evident in his expression. Sensei, I don't understand. After all that build-up, was that it? Just one strike? The aging instructor smiled faintly. What more did you need? I thought there would be more. A real fight. Multiple techniques. Something spectacular. And instead, you saw perfection. The instructor's weathered hand rested briefly on his student's shoulder. One day, you'll understand that mastery isn't about quantity of technique, but quality of execution. Not about how much you do, but about doing exactly what's needed, no more, no less. The student frowned, still unsatisfied. But it happened so fast. If I'd blinked, I would have missed it. Yes, the instructor agreed. And that, too, is part of the lesson. True mastery doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It reveals itself in moments of perfect simplicity, often gone before most people recognize what they've witnessed. As the arena began to empty, conversations similar to this one played out across the stands, some understanding the profound simplicity they had witnessed, others disappointed by the lack of extended spectacle, all of them forever changed by having been present for a moment where the essence of martial arts had revealed itself through one perfect strike. In that moment, the truth at the core of all martial arts stood revealed. True power lies not in dominance, but in understanding. Not in force, but in precision. Not in words, but in action. And sometimes, the most profound statements require no words at all. The exhibition had ended hours ago, but its aftershocks continued to ripple through Las Vegas like seismic waves. In hotel lobbies, restaurants, and bars throughout the city, conversations circled around the same topic. The moment when two philosophies had collided and one perfect strike had changed everything. In the MGM Grand's crowded lobby bar, a television replayed grainy cell phone footage for the dozenth time. The camera shook slightly, struggling to capture what happened from a distance. But even through the imperfect lens, the essence remained clear, one man approaching with theatrical confidence, the other responding with quiet precision, and then the single, clean strike that had silenced the arena. I was third row, insisted a man in a polo shirt, gesturing with his beer bottle. What the cameras missed was the lead-up. The tension was unreal. You could feel it in your chest. His companion nodded. It wasn't just what happened. It was what didn't happen. No trash talk when it was over. No victory celebration. Just acknowledgement. At a corner table, two martial arts instructors from different disciplines leaned toward each other, sketching diagrams on napkins. See, the entry angle here? The older instructor traced a diagonal line. Classic misdirection. He showed one target, but actually positioned for another. But the footwork was the key, countered his colleague, drawing a different pattern. Weight distribution created the power while maintaining perfect balance for retreat if necessary. Exactly, agreed the first, eyes lighting up. Economy of motion, nothing wasted. That's what most people missed. The perfection wasn't in what he did, but in what he didn't do. Meanwhile, in a luxurious suite 20 floors above, the younger martial artist sat alone, phone silenced and placed face down on the coffee table. The room's opulence, all gold fixtures and marble surfaces, seemed at odds with his current mood. He had dismissed his entourage an hour ago, needing space to process what had transpired. His jaw no longer hurt where the strike had landed, but the impact had left something deeper than physical pain, a resonance that continued to vibrate through his understanding of himself and his art. For 20 years, he had built a career on presence, on drama, on making every movement larger than life. His techniques were effective, yes, but always wrapped in layers of performance designed to impress and intimidate. Tonight, that approach had collided with its opposite, and in that collision, he had glimpsed something essential that had eluded him despite decades of training. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He considered ignoring it. His team knew not to disturb him, but something about the quiet, measured sound suggested this wasn't a publicist or assistant. He crossed the room and opened the door to find a hotel staff member holding a folded note. "This was left for you at the front desk, sir." The paper was simple, unadorned. Inside, just 3 lines of neat, precise handwriting. "True conversation requires privacy. Room 842. If you wish." No signature. But none was needed. 15 minutes later, dressed in simple clothing with no entourage or security, he knocked on the door of room 842, a standard room in a quieter wing of the hotel. When it opened, the contrast between this modest accommodation and his own luxury suite struck him immediately. No extravagance, no unnecessary space or decoration, just the essentials arranged with careful attention to function. Like the strike itself, nothing wasted, nothing excessive. "Thank you for coming," said the older martial artist, stepping aside in invitation. The room was neat, almost sparse. A small pot of tea sat on the desk beside 2 cups. No television played. No music sounded, just quiet that seemed deliberate rather than empty. "I wasn't sure you would want to see me," the younger man admitted, remaining standing until his host gestured toward a chair. "Why wouldn't I?" The question was genuine, not rhetorical, and it momentarily caught the younger martial artist off guard. He had expected resentment, perhaps even smugness, not this simple curiosity. "I challenged you publicly," forced a confrontation. The older man poured tea into both cups, with the same economy of motion that had characterized his fighting. No drips, no excess movement, just perfect efficiency. "You asked a question," I answered. "Some would say my approach was disrespectful." "Form and substance are different concerns." The older master handed him a cup. "Your form was theatrical, yes. But your substance was genuine. A true question about effectiveness, about truth." The younger martial artist accepted the tea, noticing how the cup was simple, ceramic, well-worn but perfectly maintained. Like everything else about his host, it embodied function over appearance, durability over display. "The media is creating quite a narrative," he said after a moment. "By tomorrow, they'll have us engaged in an epic battle spanning the hotel." A hint of a smile crossed the older master's face. Spectacle sells better than simplicity. And yet, simplicity was what mattered tonight. "Yes." They sipped tea in silence for a while. The quiet between them no longer awkward but companionable, 2 practitioners who had moved beyond words to something more fundamental. "I've been thinking about what happened," the younger man finally said. "Not just the technical aspect, but what it represents." "Which is?" 2 approaches to the same truth. Mine wrapped in layers of performance and presentation. Yours distilled to its essence. He set his cup down carefully. For years, I convinced myself the performance was necessary, that it served the art by bringing attention to it. Tonight made me question that assumption. The older master considered this. Performance has its place, he said finally. It draws people to the path. Not everyone is ready for essence immediately, but it can become a trap. For the audience and the performer. Yes, when the container becomes more important than what it contains. The younger martial artist nodded slowly, recognition dawning in his eyes. Tonight, when you struck, there was no separation between you and the technique. No performance. No self-awareness. No duality. Unity of purpose, the older master agreed. Mind, body, intention aligned. A lifetime of practice distilled to one perfect moment, as all moments should be, with or without combat. They fell silent again, but the quiet buzzed with shared understanding. Outside the window, Las Vegas continued its perpetual performance, lights flashing, music pulsing, every building and attraction competing for attention with increasingly elaborate displays. The contrast between that world and this quiet room could not have been more stark. They'll want us to capitalize on this, the younger martial artist said eventually. Exhibition matches, joint seminars, books, documentaries. My phone has been ringing non-stop with offers. And your response? I haven't given one yet. He looked directly at the older master. What would you advise? The older man considered the question with the same careful attention he seemed to give everything. What serves the art? Not your career or mine, the art itself. It was the right question, cutting through layers of potential justification to the core issue. The younger martial artist felt something shift inside him, perspective realigning around a different center. Commercializing tonight would diminish it, he said slowly. Turn substance back into spectacle. The older master nodded once, saying nothing, allowing the realization to settle fully, but silence risks letting others control the narrative. The younger man continued, thinking aloud. They'll create their own version of what happened, probably already are. Does that matter? Doesn't truth matter? The older master smiled slightly. The truth of what happened exists whether acknowledged publicly or not. Those with eyes to see saw. Those without would not be convinced by our words anyway. The wisdom in this simple observation struck the younger martial artist deeply. How much of his career had been spent trying to convince people of his skill, his knowledge, his worth, how much energy expended on presentation rather than substance. There must be a middle path, he said finally, between exploitation and absence. There always is. What would that look like for us? The older master sipped his tea before answering. Not talks about tonight, not demonstrations recreating what happened, but perhaps something that carries forward the principle demonstrated. Which principle? That true mastery transcends style. That substance matters more than form. That different paths can lead to the same summit. The younger martial artist felt inspiration, stirring not the familiar rush of a marketable idea, but something deeper and more authentic. A program, he said slowly. Not about us, but about the next generation. Something that honors the essence rather than the personalities. The older master nodded, approval evident in his eyes. By morning, the media frenzy had intensified. Every major outlet had run some version of the story, each with its own spin, its own embellishments. Headlines screamed across television screens and websites. Martial arts legends epic, showdown rocks Vegas. Decades. Old rivalry settled in explosive confrontation. Shock and awe. Inside the fight that changed everything. Most accounts bore little resemblance to what had actually transpired. One strike became multiple exchanges. Silence became quoted dialogue. Simple technique became elaborate choreography. The truth, in its elegant simplicity, wasn't dramatic enough for headlines. Yet through it all, the two central figures maintained their silence. No interviews, no statements, no public appearances. Their shared absence from the narrative only fueled further speculation, creating a void that journalists and commentators rushed to fill with increasingly creative interpretations. 6 months later, a small announcement appeared in several martial arts publications. No press conference, no fanfare, just a simple statement introducing the Essence Foundation, dedicated to supporting young martial artists who demonstrated exceptional technical skill alongside humility, discipline, and respect for all traditions. Co-founded by the two masters, the foundation would offer scholarships and training opportunities focused not on competition or performance, but on the development of character through martial discipline. The announcement included only one quote attributed to both founders. True strength isn't measured by dominance, but by contribution. Not by volume, but by impact. Not by words, but by action. No mention was made of the exhibition that had sparked their unlikely partnership. No reference to the moment that had brought them together. The focus remained entirely on the future rather than the past. On giving rather than taking. On substance rather than spectacle. Years passed. The legendary confrontation entered martial arts folklore, embellished with each retelling until it barely resembled the original event. Some claimed it had lasted for minutes, with dozens of techniques exchanged. Others insisted secret traditional knowledge had been demonstrated that cameras couldn't capture. A few even suggested spiritual energy had been visibly present, visible only to true practitioners. But in dojos and training halls around the world, instructors who understood the deeper truth would occasionally reference what had happened as a teaching moment. Not the mythologized version, but the actual event. One question asked, one answer given, one perfect strike delivered. Economy of motion. They would explain to their students, nothing wasted, nothing excessive. Everything aligned toward a single purpose. And humility in victory. Dignity in defeat. Recognition that the exchange itself matters more than who prevails. The Essence Foundation grew steadily, without flashy marketing or celebrity endorsements. Its reputation spread through results rather than promotion, through the quality of the martial artists it helped develop, through the integrity of its programs, through its unwavering focus on substance over form. Once a year, the two founders would meet to review applications and plan future initiatives. Their partnership, born from confrontation, had evolved into something neither could have anticipated: a collaboration based on shared values that transcended their different approaches. "They still ask, you know," the younger master said during one such meeting. Now not so young anymore. Lines of experience etched around his eyes. Every interview, every seminar, someone always wants to know about that night. "And your response?" asked his counterpart, whose hair had grown fully silver, but whose movements remained as precise as ever. "I tell them there are more important questions to consider." The older master nodded with approval. The best answer. A decade after the exhibition, a documentary filmmaker managed to secure a rare joint interview with both masters. Young, ambitious, and determined to uncover the real story, she arrived with pages of questions about the famous confrontation. "Before we begin," she said, setting up her equipment, "I want to thank you both for finally agreeing to discuss what really happened that night in Las Vegas. There are so many versions circulating." "We didn't agree to discuss that," the younger master interrupted gently. She looked up, confused. "But that's the whole point of the interview." "No," said the older master. "The point is the foundation, its purpose, its future. But people want to know about the past, about the confrontation, the famous strike. What was said between you afterward? The two masters exchanged a glance, a moment of perfect understanding that needed no words. What happened that night was a beginning, not an end. The younger master explained. Its value lies not in the moment itself, but in what grew from it. But don't you want people to know the truth? To correct the myths? The older master smiled slightly. Those who need the truth already found it. Those who prefer myths wouldn't believe us anyway. The filmmaker looked between them, frustration evident in her expression. So you'll never talk about it? Never set the record straight? We speak about it every day, the younger master replied. Through the foundation, through the students we teach, through how we live. Actions over words, added the older master. But words matter too, she insisted. They shape how people understand events, how history remembers them. The older master considered this, then spoke with characteristic precision. True strength isn't loud, it's undeniable. The moment itself mattered less than the principle it demonstrated. And what principle was that? She asked, sensing this might be the closest she would get to the story she sought. The two masters looked at each other again, a lifetime of understanding passing between them in a glance. That the most profound statements, said the younger master, require no words at all. As the filmmaker packed up her equipment later, visibly disappointed with an interview that had refused to dwell on the past, the two masters walked together through the training hall where students of the foundation practiced. Young people from diverse backgrounds and traditions moved through forms with focused attention, each bringing their own style but united by the same underlying principles. She didn't get what she wanted, observed the younger master. No, agreed his counterpart. But perhaps she received what she needed. A distinction I wouldn't have understood before that night. Nor would many. They paused to watch a young woman execute a technique with exceptional precision. No wasted motion. No excessive force. Just perfect economy, aligned with clear intention. In her movement, they saw the future of their shared vision. Mastery that transcended style. Substance that required no spectacle. Truth that needed no announcement. In that moment, the circle completed itself. What had begun with confrontation had transformed into contribution. What had started with a question about superiority had evolved into an answer about service. Different paths, same destination. True strength isn't loud, it's undeniable. And sometimes, a single, perfect strike says all that needs saying. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.